A Great Argead Saga Alexein, Alexander the Great. Volume 2, Hieros Lochos, The Sacred Band. By Makāula Nakae. Episode 24, Rivers of Exile. The midday sun beat down against the white stone walls of Archidamus' peristyle courtyard, warming the air with the scent of dry earth and crushed bay leaves. Around a low wooden table set in the shaded colonnade, the youngest foreign wards, Cletus, barely 6, with his unruly shock of dark hair, 5-year-olds Phormio Simmias, and Pammenes, 6-year-old Cylon and Menelaus, and 7-year-olds Lysias and Corhegus, sat picking listlessly at their midday meal of soft bread, goat cheese, and dried figs. For a long moment, the only sound was the scrape of wooden platters and the distant hum of the upper Cadmea. Then Lysias, turning a dried fig over in his fingers, broke the silence. "Back in Pella," Lysias muttered, staring down at his bread, as if he could see through the stone floor. "All the way north, my father and my older brother took me down to the riverbank. The water ran so fast it made your teeth ache just to look at it. We didn't use nets. We had long rods with curved bronze hooks, and we sat on the gray boulders until the sun went behind the pines." Cletus stopped chewing, his dark eyes instantly fixing on Lysias. "Did you catch anything?" "Big trout," Lysias said, a rare flash of pride warming his pale face. "Silvery ones with spots like painted ink. My brother let me hold the rod when the line twitching. It pulled so hard I thought a river demon had it by the tail." Across the table, Phormio's lower lip quivered. "My father took me to the lake near our summer house. We threw crumbs into the green reeds, and whole schools of tiny fish darted up so fast the water boiled." Corhegus slammed his small fist against the edge of the wooden table, making the platters rattle. "I hate it here. There are no rivers in these stone courtyards. I want to go fishing. I want to sit on a real bank where the mud gets between your toes and the wind doesn't smell like old dust." The discontent swept through the table like a spark in dry grass. Simmias and Pammenes began to chime in, their voices rising with a desperate, homesick longing. Cylon buried his face in his arms, his shoulders shaking as the memory of wide open waters collided with the heavy reality of their gilded cage. "I want to go fishing," Cletus whispered fiercely, his small jaw setting into that stubborn line that would define his life. He pushed his bread away, his appetite entirely vanished. "I want to catch a fish. I want to go home." Footsteps approached from the inner archway. Ariston, 13 years old and carrying a bundle of writing tablets from his morning studies, stopped short at the entrance of the colonnade. He looked at the ruined meal, the tear-streaked faces of the younger boys, and his mother, Timoclea, standing quietly beside Gorgo near the marble pillars. Stepping into the courtyard, Ariston walked over to his mother, his brow furrowed with concern. "Mother," Ariston asked, his voice dropping as he looked around the tense, weeping circle of boys. "What's happening? Why are they all so upset?" Timoclea looked down at her son, a bittersweet sigh escaping her lips. She rested a hand gently on his shoulder. "They were talking about home, Ariston, remembering the rivers of the north. They want to go fishing." Cletus scrambled off his bench, running straight to Gorgo and grabbing the hem of her stala with both small, ink-stained hands. He looked up at her, his expression a fragile mix of rebellion and heartbreaking plea. "Please, Gorgo," Cletus begged, his voice cracking. "Just take us to the river. We won't run away. We just want to see the water move. We want to fish, like we used to with our fathers." Lysias, Corhegus, and the rest of the boys crowded around Timoclea and Gorgo, a desperate chorus of small voices echoing the same plea over and over against the stone walls of the Cadmea, while Ariston watched with a quiet, empathetic understanding, remembering his own younger years. Ariston piped up from the edge of the bench, looking anxiously between mothers and the foreign boys. Can we go down to the water? Just for an afternoon?" Gorgo looked down at Cletus, feeling the heavy, familiar ache in her chest. She glanced across the courtyard at Timoclea. For a long, silent moment, the two women exchanged a deep, unspoken understanding of the quiet misery their grandhouses had failed to cure. Timoclea let out a long breath, a faint, wry smile, touching the corners of her mouth as she looked down at Corhegus, tugging frantically at her shawl. "Well," Timoclea said, her voice carrying clearly across the peristyle as she reached down to gently pry Corhegus's fingers loose and pat his hand. "The Boeotian magistrates say the foreign wards must be guarded at all times. kept away from the gates and locked safely within our walls. The boys' faces fell instantly, shadows washing over their features. Fortunately, Gorgo added, stepping forward and placing a firm, protective hand on Cletus's dark curls, her eyes flashing with quiet defiance against the austere rules of the city. Neither of us has ever been very good at obeying magistrates. Timoclea nodded, turning toward the interior corridors. Pelopidas is off in the north now. Go fetch your light cloaks. If these young princes want to see the rivers of Boeotia, then by the gods, we are taking them fishing. At her words, the little boys flooded the courtyard, filled with sudden, irrepressible joy and excitement. Ariston, gather the fishing gear and bait, one of them urged, before pausing with a sudden doubt. I don't know, have you ever even been fishing, Ariston? Ariston grinned, adjusting his tunic. Not with my father, but with others. The heavy oak gates of the compound groaned on their iron pivots, swinging outward with a deep protesting hiss of hinges to reveal a world the children had only ever imagined through narrow clerestory windows. Outside? Little Cletus thought, his breath catching in his throat as the protective timber frame vanished behind them. Is there really nothing above us except that massive blue ceiling? Ariston planted his boots firmly on the stone threshold, the bundled fishing poles gripped tight across his shoulder like a heavy lance. His chest tightened. This is it, he thought, his knuckles turning pale. Beyond this wall, there are no tutors, no courtyards, no rules written on clay. Just the real world. Beside him, little Cletus shrank back an inch, his small hand instantly flying out to clutch the rough wool of Gorgo's tunic. His breath hitched in his throat. It's too big, Cletus worried internally, pressing his cheek against her clammies as a mule cart rumbled past. The sky, there is nothing holding it up out there. What if the sky falls down where there are no walls to hold it up? The younger pack of boys, Corhegus, Manilius, Simmias, Polemon, Lysias, Phormio, and Cylon, crowded tightly behind Ariston, their eyes wide and saucer-like. Are we allowed out here? Corhegus thought nervously, his fingers twitching at his hem. Where are the guards? What if a stray hound jumps us? Look at all that dirt and space, Phormio whispered under his breath to Polemon, who blinked rapidly against the blinding glare of the sun. There's no boundary wall in sight. The mothers caught the sudden hesitation in the children's step. Breathe, boys, Timoclea said softly, her hand resting firmly on Ariston's rigid shoulder. She offered a reassuring, steady smile, though her own eyes scanned the bustling street with protective alertness. It only looks enormous because you've spent your whole lives staring at stone walls. The world isn't an enemy, it's just waiting to be walked on. Gorgo stepped past the threshold first, her chin held high with characteristic Spartan defiance, while Timoclea walked with the quiet, unyielding grace of a noble Theban matron. Gorgo looked down at Cletus, whose lower lip was trembling slightly between nervous excitement and awe. A true Spartan son does not flinch at the horizon, Gorgo murmured gently to Cletus, before turning an approving glance toward Ariston. And a son of Pelopidas walks with the blood of Thebes behind him. Look at it. Every roof, every cart, every path belongs to the living. Are you going to stay behind the gate like a caged bird, or are you coming with me? Ariston swallowed hard, the weight of his father's legendary name and his new responsibility as the older brother, steadying his boots. He forced them to move forward into the blinding sunlight, turning back to the younger boys to mask his racing pulse behind a mask of authority. Come on, Ariston called out, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat and tried again, louder this time. Keep up? Corhegus stopped lagging behind. Manilius, Simmias, stay close. If we're going to the river, we don't have all day to stand here staring at dirt. Behind them, the trusted female servants stepped out carrying the wicker baskets stuffed with woolen blankets, linen lines, and crusts of hard bread. Murmurs of quiet relief and amusement passed between them as they locked the heavy doors shut behind the group. As they turned the corner past the public colonnade, the vibrant murmurs of the city washed over them like a physical wave, the distant, sharp shouts of merchants bargaining in the bustling marketplace, the metallic clatter of bronze-shod cart wheels striking the paving stones, and the barking of stray dogs darting between alleys. For the boys, whose world had hitherto been bounded by nursery walls, polished marble floors, and stern tutors droning on about grammar and laws, it was a dizzying, intoxicating taste of freedom. Their eyes darted everywhere, wide with a mixture of nervous awe and irrepressible joy. Lysias and Cylon pointed excitedly at a passing merchant leading a camel, while Simmias and Phormio nearly tripped over their own sandals, trying to look up at a towering bronze statue of Heracles. They stared at the sun glinting off distant shield racks and the shifting crowds of citizens wrapped in colorful cloaks. Slowly, the nervous tension dissolved, replaced by an electric rush of liberation as little Cletus unclipped his tight grip from Gorgo's chlamys, taking his very first independent step onto the open dust of Thebes. As the small band moved deeper into the arteries of Thebes, the sheer sensory shock of the public thoroughfares hit the children like a physical wave. This was nothing like the orderly, predictable stone courtyards of Pella or the austere, martial symmetry of the Cadmea, where military drills and disciplined silences ruled the day. Thebes was sprawling, chaotic, and fiercely alive. "Keep your eyes forward and your hands to yourselves," Timoclea warned quietly, guiding the younger boys as they navigated the crowded marketplace near the Amphion gate. Stalls choked the sides of the limestone streets, spilling over with glistening purple figs, fresh cheeses wrapped in fig leaves, and hanging clusters of dried herbs that filled the air with a pungent herbal haze. "They're shouting so loud," Simmias whispered, clutching Palamon's sleeve as a vendor banged a copper ladle against a pot. "Do they do this every day?" "Look at those figs," Corhagus thought, his stomach rumbling as Cylon pulled him back from a stumbling mule. "If we get lost here, we'll never find our way back to the courtyard." Little Cletus stared wide-eyed at a towering bronze merchant loudly haggling with a passing pelt seller, his voice booming over the din of clattering copper pots and braying donkeys. "In Pella, everything is quiet unless the king or the regents are speaking," Cletus thought, instinctively ducking behind Gorgo's skirts as a water carrier rushed past with a sloshing skin. "Here," everyone is shouting at once. It sounds like an entire army arguing over a single loaf of bread. Lysias and Phormio pointed frantically at a juggler tossing colored wooden pins near a fruit stall, their mouths hanging open in pure wonder, until Menelaus tugged on their tunics to keep them moving with the group. Ariston marched slightly ahead, his grip on the fishing poles whitening as he tried to mask his underlying wonder with a stoic older brother scowl. Yet, his eyes darted constantly from side to side, drinking in the dizzying spectacle of the morning market. "Father always says the strength of Thebes lives in the noise of its people, not just the stone of its walls," Ariston thought, watching a group of merchants and citizens press through the dusty square. At home, every hour is mapped out by tutors and drills. But out here, everything is moving, breathing, and shouting all at once. Gorgo noticed Ariston's fixed gaze and offered a reassuring, knowing smile, stepping closer to shield him, and little Cletus from an oncoming cart laden with clay amphorae. "Overwhelmed, Ariston?" Gorgo asked gently, her voice cutting through the market clamor. Ariston swallowed hard, lifting his chin just a fraction higher to mirror his father's resolve. "No, mother. Just watching. We spend so much time behind closed gates learning how to defend Thebes. But out here," he hesitated, searching for the right word as a group of laughing youths rushed past carrying wineskins. "Out here, you actually get to see what we're fighting for. That is the double-edged sword of a free polis," Timoclea added, her eyes scanning the lively stalls with a practiced protective sharpness. "A city of citizens rather than subjects is always loud, always arguing, and always on the verge of boiling over. But when they march together as they did at Leuctra under your father's command, that same chaotic energy becomes an iron fist." As they pressed past the bustling market squares and headed toward the quieter, greener tracks winding down toward the Ismenos River, the oppressive crush of the crowd began to thin, replaced by the soothing murmur of flowing water and rustling poplars. The boys, from Corhagus and Lysias down to little Cletus, Phormio, and Simmias, let out a collective audible breath of relief, the nervous tension of the city streets melting away as the wide, open banks of the river finally came into view. As they pressed past the bustling market squares and headed toward the quieter, greener tracks winding down toward the Ismenos River, the oppressive crush of the crowd began to thin, replaced by the soothing murmur of flowing water and rustling poplars. The boys, 5 to 7-year-old, let out a collective audible breath of relief, the nervous tension of the city streets melting away. "My legs hurt from walking so fast," Simmias thought, rubbing his ankles as 5-year-old Pammenes grabbed his hand to keep him from lagging behind. Are we safe from the market noise now? Philip wondered, glancing back nervously toward the stone walls. Before reaching the open meadows, however, their path converged on the massive stone bulk of the Ismenus gate, the outer defensive threshold piercing the city walls. A pair of off-duty Boeotian guards, leaning casually against their heavy spears, straightened up as the group approached, their eyes sweeping over the mothers, the trusted female servants carrying wicker baskets stuffed with woolen blankets, linen lines, and crusts of hard bread, and the cluster of wide-eyed boys. Guards, Ariston thought, his grip tightening instantly on the fishing poles as his posture stiffened. Are they going to stop us? What if they say we need a magistrate's permit just to walk on the grass? Gorgo and Cylon instinctively ducked slightly behind Ariston's shoulders, while Lysias and Phormio stared at the polished bronze spearheads with wide, apprehensive eyes. Halt, the older guard commanded, raising a palm before lowering it respectfully as he recognized Timoclea and Gorgo. Out through the southern portal today, noble matrons? The fields beyond are clear, but the city wardens require an accounting of who leaves the perimeter. Timoclea did not break her stride, stepping forward with an unyielding, aristocratic calm that immediately commanded the checkpoint. Let them try to tell a mother she cannot walk with her children under the open sky, Timoclea thought, her chin rising as her eyes met the guards. We are carrying provisions for a family outing to the riverbank, soldier, Timoclea replied aloud, her voice steady and absolute. Unless the council has barred citizens from walking beneath the sun on a market fresh morning, I trust these walls still serve to protect us, rather than cage us. The guard offered a slight, knowing grin, recognizing the sharp authority in her tone, and stepped aside, rapping his spear but lightly against the stone. Pass freely, Lady Timoclea. May the catch be better than the guard duty. With a nod of acknowledgement, they crossed the final threshold, stepping right through the massive iron-bound gates and out into the open countryside. Suddenly, the sweeping scenery of Boeotia opened up before them in a breathtaking expanse. The Ismenos River wound like a shining silver ribbon through lush, emerald-green meadows dotted with grazing sheep and ancient olive groves. In the distance, the rolling hills rose gently toward the sunlit horizon, framed by the vast open sky. It's all real, little Cletus thought, his jaw dropping slightly as he stared out at the endless green valley, the wind catching his dark hair. There's no ceiling. There's just the earth and the sky. The valley burst upon their senses with a sudden, overwhelming vitality. A warm, sweet breeze rolled off the water, carrying the rich, damp scent of river mud, wild fennel, and sun-baked thyme. Above them, flocks of swallows darted and sliced through the air in flashing arcs of iridescent blue, their sharp chirps mingling with the distant, steady bleating of sheep grazing along the lower slopes. Across the verdant fields, peasant workers and vineyard tenders moved in rhythmic harmony, weeding the rich soil and laughing as they hauled wooden crates of early harvest tools. Every color was painfully bright, the silver-green flicker of olive leaves, the deep gold of wild mustard flowers, and the sparkling diamond shimmer of the river current. Look, Simmias gasped, pointing wildly toward a pair of white-tailed hawks soaring high above the distant ridge. Gorgo and Cylon broke into an impromptu race down the gentle slope, their sandals kicking up puffs of dry dust before Timoclea called out a laughing warning to keep together. Pammenes and Phormio dropped to their knees in the high grass, marveling at a cluster of scarlet poppies fluttering in the breeze, while Lysias and Philip chased a brilliant yellow butterfly across the meadow. Ariston adjusted the fishing poles on his shoulder, a rare, genuine smile breaking through his serious expression as he breathed in the unconfined air. For the boys, from Gorgo, Lysias, and Ariston down to Philip, Cylon, Simmias, Pammenes, Phormio, and little Cletus, who had spent their entire lives enclosed by stone walls and courtyard tiles, the sudden, sweeping majesty of the valley took their breath away, making the wide-open world feel entirely their own. With General Pelopidas away in the north to deal with the tyrant and Epaminondas deeply occupied with affairs of state and council, Pammenes took it upon himself to keep the young northern wards and Princes Philip, Antigonus, Pethan, Leonidas, and Amintor occupied and disciplined. Deciding that a change of atmosphere would sharpen their minds, Pammenes led the group across the city, to Peloponnes's estate to tutor the younger children there. But upon their arrival, the heavy oak doors swung open to reveal an unusually quiet, sunlit courtyard. Only a lone, bewildered household servant greeted them. "Where are Timoclea, Gorgo, and the boys?" Pammenes asked, his brow furrowing as he looked across the empty stone patio. The servant bowed his head respectfully. "They are not here, Lord. They have all gone out." Pammenes blinked, entirely caught off guard. "Gone out? Where?" "Fishing, master," the servant replied, a faint hint of amusement in his voice. "Lady Gorgo, Lady Timoclea, young Ariston, and all the little ones, Corhegus, Manilus, Simius, Polemon, little Cletus, Lysias, Phormio, and Cylon, took the baskets and headed down toward the Ismenos River." "Fishing?" Pammenes thought, staring at the servant in disbelief. The wives of the leading statesmen of Thebes, escorting a band of 5- and 6-year-olds to the riverbanks on a training morning. Philip exchanged a sidelong glance with Antigonus, a smirk playing at the corner of the Macedonian prince's mouth. "Well," Philip murmured, "it seems Boeotian discipline has its unexpected holidays." "Come," Pammenes commanded, shaking his head with a mixture of exasperation and fond respect. "If they have ventured out into the city, we are going after them. Let us see how these young northern princes handle the streets of Thebes." Stepping out from the quiet courtyard and into the vibrant arteries of the city, Philip, Antigonus, Python, Leonidas, and Amintor experienced the same sensory shock that the younger children had earlier that morning. Unlike the rigid, symmetrical order of Pella's palace grounds are the austere stone drills of the Cadmea, Thebes pulsed with chaotic, unfiltered life. Stalls overflowed with purple figs and fragrant herbs, merchants shouted over the din of braying donkeys, and citizens of every rank brushed shoulders on the dusty limestone paving. "It's maddeningly loud," Philip thought, ducking slightly as a water carrier rushed past with a sloshing skin. In Pella, the streets move only when the king commands. Here, the city breathes on its own. Antigonus gripped the hilt of his short sword instinctively, his eyes darting across the bustling marketplace. "Every man here looks like a free citizen, ready to argue with a magistrate," Antigonus marveled internally. There are no uniformed guards at every corner, yet the city holds together by sheer will. Guided by Pammenes, the group pressed through the crowd until they reached the massive stone bulk of the Ismenus gate. As they stepped through the heavy iron-bound portal and out into the open countryside, the sweeping scenery of Boeotia opened up before them in a breathtaking expanse. The Ismenus River wound like a shining silver ribbon through lush, emerald-green meadows dotted with grazing sheep and ancient olive groves. The warm wind carried the scent of wild thyme and river mud, and in the distance, the rolling hills rose gently toward the sunlit horizon under a vast, endless sky. Python let out a slow breath, his eyes widening as he stared out at the sweeping valley. "By the gods," he whispered. Even Philip, accustomed to the grand vistas of northern Macedonia, felt a sudden, rare stillness settle over him as the wide-open landscape stretched out before them, making the entire world feel entirely alive and waiting to be claimed. Along the sun-warmed banks of the Ismenus River, the grassy meadows echoed with the sound of pure, unbridled laughter. The young boys had abandoned all their nursery decorum. With rolled-up tunics and bare feet splashing wildly in the shallows, they crowded around Ariston, who stood on a flat limestone slab like a seasoned captain on a deck. "Hold the line steady, Cletus." "Not like that, or you'll snap the reed," Ariston instructed, his chest swelling with the weight of his responsibilities as he guided his younger brother and the others. "I'm leading them just like father leads the phalanx," Ariston thought proudly, biting his lip as little Cletus yanked his makeshift linen line upward, with a triumphant shriek. "I got one." "I got a scale shiner," Cletus screamed with joy, water splashing over his knees as a small, silver-scaled fish flipped frantically in the grass. "Look at Simius. He fell right in." Cylon howled with laughter, pointing at 5-year-old Simius, who sat flat on his back end in the shallow river mud, laughing so hard he could barely stand up, while Polemon and Phormio rushed over to poke at the squirming catch. Corhegus and Lysias cheered wildly, tossing handfuls of river reeds into the air. A few paces away, sheltered beneath the wide, whispering canopy of an ancient olive tree, the mothers enjoyed a moment of profound peace. Timoclea and Gorgo sat comfortably on a woolen blanket spread over the clover, leaning back against cushions brought from the estate. "Listen to them," Gorgo murmured, a gentle, rare smile softening her stern Spartan features as she watched little Cletus scramble after another darting shadow in the water. "For all our drilling and rules in the halls, this is where they truly grow." "Let them have the riverbank today," Timoclea agreed, pouring cool spring water from a clay flask into a small silver cup. "The council chambers and the barracks will demand enough of their blood and sweat when they are men. Today they belong only to the sun, standing a respectful distance away." The trusted female servants watched over the entire scene with warm, affectionate vigilance. They kept close watch over the woven wicker baskets, packed with woolen blankets, spare tunics, and crusts of hard bread, while keeping a sharp eye out to ensure no one wandered too far down the winding banks. One servant chuckled softly as Menelaus tossed a pebble at Phormio's ear, while another adjusted a linen parasol to shield the provisions. Bathed in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by the murmur of the river and the bright shouts of the boys, the burdens of Thebes and Pella felt a million miles away. Pammenes and the young Macedonian princes stepped down the grassy slope toward the riverbank, where the chaotic, joyous splashing of the boys echoed against the poplars. Pammenes stopped at the edge of the olive grove, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, fixing the two-seated matrons with a serious, critical eye. "What madness is this?" Pammenes thought, his jaw tightening as he surveyed the scene. Leaving the estate unguarded, dragging the future heirs and sons of Thebes out into the open fields without a detachment of guards. Have they lost their minds with all the spring air? Timoclea caught his expression before he could even utter a reprimand, holding up a hand with a dry, knowing smirk. "He looks ready to declare a state of emergency over a fishing pole," Timoclea thought, amusement dancing in her eyes. We know, Timoclea said aloud. The boys are supposed to be deep in their grammar and tactical drills back at the courtyard. Gorgo didn't even flinch under his stern gaze. She leaned back against her cushion, her eyes flashing with a sharp, unapologetic warmth. Let him scowl, Gorgo thought. A man who spends every waking hour staring at maps and troop movements has forgotten what the sun actually feels like on a child's face. "General Pammenes," Gorgo said aloud, her voice light yet challenging. "Why don't you want to have some fun with those little ones? It's refreshing." "General," Timoclea added, her voice softening with a quiet, profound truth as she gestured around the open valley. "You and the men can march out into this wild land whenever the state demands it. But us? We are all caged inside those high stone walls until these little boys came and joined our households." Caged, Pammenes thought, the words striking a sharp chord in his chest as he glanced back toward the distant stone ramparts of the Cadmea. She speaks the truth. We build walls to keep the enemy out, but we lock our women and children inside them just the same. Gorgo nodded firmly, her gaze locking onto the veteran general. "We are all caged birds, Pammenes. Give us a bit of luxury, just a breath of life, just this one moment." Pammenes looked at the two women, taking in the rare, unguarded peace etched on their faces. The unspoken weight of politics, tyrants, wars, and endless vigilance hung heavy between them. But looking out at the children splashing in the Ismenos River, the argument melted away. A deep, silent understanding passed between them, a look of mutual, unyielding respect for the heavy burdens they all carried. "She's right," Pammenes admitted to himself, his posture finally relaxing. "We fight for freedom, yet we deny it to our own hearths." Pammenes dropped his arms, a slow, appreciative smile breaking through his stern facade. "Time to let the young wolves run," Philip thought eagerly, his eyes locking onto the splashing boys down in the shallows as he rolled up his sleeves. "Well," Pammenes said aloud, his voice carrying over the murmur of the water. "You heard the ladies. My boys, join the little ones. Make sure our dinner table tonight is abundant." At his command, Philip, Antigonus, Pethan, Leonidas, and Amintor broke into grins, unfastening their heavy cloaks and tossing them onto the grass as they rushed down the bank to join the laughing chaos in the shallows. To be continued in episode 25, First Theban Rescue. Watch and listen now. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Lysias playlist. Volume 2, Hieros Lochos, the Sacred Band playlist. Bookmark Volume 1, Divine Oracle playlist. Join the Vanguard. A new episode drops every single day until the epic conclusion of Volume 2. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our Vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below.